patience today, I really haven't.
Now settle down.
Fucking hell! I'm really getting fucking mad with you! Every fucking time point! You better shut up. Fucking sit still! Oh, shut up. Take all the pictures you want! Take all you want, you coward! Because we're delivering bastards! But we're not in the offices! We don't fucking care! We're never going away! And we always win!
That is fucking disgusting. Did you kill it yourself? How do you feel about that? You skin alive? I bet you have a nice cat at home too. Did you skin that? You fucking pervert.
I did have one experience, I think, back in 1975, I think, which was a life-changing experience, and that was because I was with Greenpeace at that time, and we'd come up with this idea of protecting whales by putting our bodies between the harpoons and the whales. We were reading a lot of Gandhi back then, and we thought, hey, well, you know, this would work. And I found myself in a little rubber boat behind a pod of 8 magnificent sperm whales that were fleeing for their life, and behind us was this 150-foot-long Soviet harpoon vessel that was bearing down on the whales. And every time the harpooner tried to take a shot, I would maneuver and block his path. And it was working for a while until the captain came down the catwalk rather angrily, and he screamed into the ear of the harpooner, and then he looked at us, smiled, and brought his finger across his neck like this, and that's when I realized Gandhi wasn't going to pull us through that day. And a few minutes later, there was this horrendous explosion, and this harpoon flew over our head and slammed into the back of one of the whales in the pod. And there was this incredible scream. It was a very human-like scream, and it took me completely by surprise. I didn't expect a whale to sound like that. Suddenly, the ocean erupted, and I turned in time to see the whale throw himself straight at the harpooner to protect his pod. And the harpooner just pulled the trigger and at point-blank range set another harpoon into the head of the whale, and it exploded. There was blood and gore and everything everywhere, and the whale fell back in the water screaming and in agony. And as he turned, I caught his eye, and he looked straight at me, and now he dove again, and I saw a trail of bloody bubbles coming straight at our boat, and he came up and out of the water at an angle so that the next move was to come forward and crash down on top of us. And I looked up into this eye, and it was right there, an eye the size of my fist, really, and what I saw in there really changed my life, because the whale understood what we were trying to do. Because the easiest thing to do at that moment was to come forward, but instead I could see the effort he made as he went back and then slid back into the sea, and I saw his eye disappear beneath the surface, and then he died. The whale could have taken our lives and chose not to do so. So I feel personally indebted to that whale, and I've tried to save as many of his kind ever since.
I've been at the ASPCA for 10 years, and then before that I worked at an animal shelter in Long Island, and that's where it all came together for me. That's when I realized how many animals were being abused and neglected, and I really needed to do more. So when I found out there was a law enforcement department, I said, you know what, that's what I need to be. I can do that. I can lock people up for hurting animals, and that's what I do, and I love what I do.
And do you know that I was nervous about adopting a dog, because I thought, well, what if I'm not home all the time? And then I thought, wait a minute, a dog is better off with me than about to be euthanized in a shelter. What am I doing? Go get the dog.
Protesting what they call barbaric conditions at LA's animal shelter.
And so I volunteered at a local animal shelter. And one morning I got there early. And I went into an area that I wasn't supposed to be in. And I saw these dogs lined up down a hallway, each one with a rope around their neck. So each one was taken, one in front of the other, slapped on a stainless steel table, held down against their will. Their eyes were wide with terror, and they were being killed. They weren't being euthanized. They weren't being put to sleep. They were being killed. And I realized then that I had to do something. It was so horrific that we were killing man's best friend. And I thought, how can this be? How come I, as a compassionate person, didn't know this was going on? And it's because it's hidden. It's hidden from the public
We can't turn our backs on what we know so plainly now.
Somebody had called and said there were 6 dogs and they were in the mud and the mother was dead and could we go get them? We went by there and I had on slacks, she had on, first time I'd ever seen anybody have a pink suede suit. It was gorgeous. So we stopped at the place and she tells me to get out of the car, go knock on the door and see if anybody's there, which I did. Then I came back and said, nobody's there. Did you knock on the window? Okay. Knocked on. Anyway, I said, but I can see the puppies, they're in the mud. And she said, well, go get them. I said, go get them. She said, go over the fence and get the dogs. And she was the type of person when someone told you. So I get out, go over the fence. There's 6 of them in the mud, just little puppies. No, pick 2 of them up, come back, hand them to her. She puts them back to call them before I know it, and she was always had on high heels and stockings. That's when everybody wore slips. And she took off this skirt that was pink suede and held it out and said, go get the rest of the dogs and put them here. And we took them to the vet. It was hard, but then it was a lot of joy. There was a lot of heartbreak. There was a lot of crying. There was a lot of drinking when we got upset. But most of the time, we felt really good that we'd done a little bit. Well, I mean, a lot of people won't take an animal to the shelter. Right. I mean, because they say, oh, I just couldn't possibly do it. But they'll let it starve or let it out.
How can you fucking drop these little babies? How can you do that?
Because people do, they're disgusting.
That's disgusting.
And they shouldn't have animals to begin with.
I mean, how? I just can't imagine. Oh my gosh, you're so cute.
I think it was 1992 when there was a German couple who was honeymooning not far from here at the Grand Canyon. And it was a hot August day, and they were hiking there, and they came across a mother cat and her 3 kittens who were huddled up against a rock in this blazing sun, and they'd obviously just been, abandoned there. They'd been dumped there by people passing by. And they scooped up the mother and these baby kittens, rushed to the car, drove to a gas station, said, help, where do we go now? And somebody directed them to Best Friends. And they were here within about an hour, and they stayed around while we were giving the kittens their fluids and looking after the mother cat. And I was showing them around a bit, and they seemed very puzzled by what was happening here. And I said, well, what's the matter? You seem very puzzled by something. And they looked at each other and they said to me, so where do all these animals come from? And I said, I was kind of surprised by this. I said, well, they come from humane societies and shelters who can't, look after them for very long. So they said, so why do they have to come here? And I said, well, obviously, at the shelters, they have to be killed after a few days. And they looked at me in this complete horror. And they said, you mean in this country they kill homeless pets? And I said, well, yeah. And they said, in our country, it is illegal to kill a homeless animal. And I looked at them, and they looked at me, and we were both, our jaws were both dropping, mine at what goes on in Germany, and theirs at what goes on here. And you begin to realize then that everything that you thought was this kind of necessary situation that you couldn't help, and this is just the way it is, and killing homeless animals in shelters is just one of those, quotes, necessary evils. And you think, well, it really doesn't have to be like that at all.